Order. Meeting is now resumed.
Good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner. For the record, it's Lara Tesaro, Commission Counsel. And for the remainder of the day, or possibly less, we are hearing from Mr. Graham Gillespie, and I'd ask that he be affirmed.
You solemnly affirm that the evidence to be given by you to this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you state your name, please?
Graham Gillespie.
Thank you. Counsel?
Mr. Lund, could I ask that you pull up tab 37 of our documents? Mr. Gillespie, is this your CV?
Yes, it is.
Could I ask that this be marked as the next exhibit?
Exhibit number 821.
I should actually note before I qualify or seek to qualify Mr. Gillespie that with me today is Mr. John Major, who has been assisting with the squid evidence, and Mr. Brian Wallace at the back of the classroom. So, Mr. Gillespie, since July 1994, you have been employed as an invertebrate research biologist at DFO Pacific Biological Station. Is that right?
That is correct.
And you're also currently the head of the shellfish section at PBS.
Correct.
And in these roles, you are responsible for planning, organizing, and participating in research into the biology, ecology, and population dynamics of commercially and/or ecologically important invertebrate stocks or species at risk in the Northeast Pacific Ocean.
That is correct.
And you have a particular emphasis on bivalves, crustaceans, cephalopods, and non-indigenous invertebrates.
Correct.
From the mid-1990s to the early 2000s, you've published a number of peer-reviewed reports on the assessment, biology, and fisheries of cephalopods, particularly various octopod and squid species, correct?
That's correct.
You've designed and participated in surveys of squid species in BC waters, including a survey of the Humboldt squid in 2009.
Yes.
You participate in the Pisces Working Group on Non-Indigenous Species.
Yes, I do.
And you have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the University of Victoria, obtained in 1985.
That's correct.
I would submit that Mr. Gillespie should be qualified as an expert in the assessment and biology of squid species in the Northeast Pacific Ocean, including the Humboldt squid.
Thank you.
Mr. Gillespie, could you briefly describe your general duties and activities as an invertebrate research biologist at PBS?
Generally, what we do is develop science information and science advice that is then brought forward through a review process and delivered to managers to help inform and influence their management of fisheries or other management actions.
And what percentage of your time would you estimate do you spend in relation to work on cephalopods?
A fairly small proportion, I would say on average about 10% of my time.
And perhaps for the benefit of everyone in the room, as a matter of taxonomy, what is a cephalopod?
Cephalopods are squid, octopi, or cuttlefish.
Thank you. And how many employees of DFO Science in the Pacific region have specific duties that include working on cephalopods?
Just myself.
I'm going to ask you a few questions about the general biology of the Humboldt squid, life history, distribution, abundance, before we turn specifically to look at its diet. And perhaps you could start by just describing for the Commissioner the basic life history of the Humboldt squid, including its migrations into BC waters.
Okay. Humboldt squid are a large migratory offshore species of squid. Their life begins as paralarvae when eggs hatch in tropical waters of the eastern Pacific. And as the squid grow, they take a feeding migration that carries them both north and south from those waters. In most years, that migration has ceased at about the US-Mexican border in the north. But more recently, we've found them as far north as southeastern Alaska in the late summer and fall. They move north to feed. They grow at a prodigious rate, grow quite quickly. Therefore, they need a lot of food to fuel not only the metabolic demands of growth, but also undertaking this long-range migration. They generally leave our waters in September, October, and return back to the tropics to spawn.
And you said that it was only more recently that they began appearing in waters basically north of Mexico. I'm wondering if you could put some years to that.
There's some evidence of an extension of that range in the 1930s, at least as far as the mouth of the Columbia River. There's pictures of Edwin Ricketts, who ran the biological supply company in Monterey, California, with a Humboldt squid from sometime in the 1930s. The information that I have is they appeared for a few years and then their range shrank back to where it had been before. We started to get anecdotal reports of large squid in offshore waters from our oceanographers who were undertaking surveys out to Weather Station Papa. And those squid were not formally identified as Humboldt squid at the time because they were merely observed, they weren't collected.
And that was in the late 90s?
I'm sorry, that would be in the late 1990s. Yeah, the first confirmed specimens that we had from BC waters were in 2004, and then we had increasing abundance from 2004 forward to a peak of abundance in 2009. We don't formally measure abundance. We don't have quantitative estimates. We work from qualitative information like evidence from animals being stranded on the beach, public reports, and then catches in commercial and surveys. So we saw a few in 2005, some more in 2007, and then a large abundance in 2009.
When you say some more in 2007, are you able to even roughly guesstimate what the abundance might have been, or qualitatively characterize it?
Relatively. Nothing quantitative, but in 2007 we had a few reports from recreational fishers, and we had one stranding event at Nootka Island. I believe we also had one squid that was trapped in a predator net in a salmon farm in Nootka Sound. So that's relatively few reports. In 2009, we had 11 reported strandings, another 7 public reports, a number of reports of catches in commercial fisheries, and then our survey in 2009 provided a lot of information on distribution and relative abundance.
Would it be fair to characterize 2009 as relatively very abundant in contrast to previous years?
Yes, it would.
And what about 2010?
In 2010, they did not extend north of southern Oregon. The northernmost stranding report that I heard of was in southern Oregon. They didn't appear in Washington or BC waters at all.
Do we have any predictions from people who are out on the water now, say in California, about whether the squid are going to materialize in BC waters in 2011?
I've been in contact with Dr. John Field, who works with NOAA out of Santa Cruz. He indicated that they hadn't seen any off California as of April. He also indicated that a colleague, Dr. Bill Gilley, who does work on Humboldt squid off Mexico, indicated that abundances there were low this year. And his opinion, which I agree with, was that we're not likely to see them in BC waters again this year.
Just to finish up on the issue of distribution, perhaps, Mr. Lund, you could pull up tab 42 of the Commission's list of documents. Do you recognize this document that's on the screen?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
This is a presentation that I prepared using information provided by John Field and that I had collected through our own programs that was made to a workshop on the possible causes of decline of Fraser sockeye in 2011.
That was a workshop in April of 2011.
That's correct.
And is it right to think that that's what's sometimes referred to as a synthesis workshop?
Yes, I believe that's accurate.
Just for a handy reference, if we could turn to page 7 of this document. Did you create this slide at page 7?
Yes, I did.
And in terms of the distribution of squid in Georgia Strait, am I right to read that one square?
Yes.
That red square that looks close to Campbell River, does that represent just one sighting of Humboldt squid in the strait?
Yes, it's a single squid that washed up in Campbell River in December of 2009, I believe. So this is an animal that somehow got lost or strayed on the southward migration and took a wrong turn at the north end of Vancouver Island and ended up in the strait.
And what about the Strait of Juan de Fuca? Can you interpret the map for us there?
It's the same year, the same month. It's another squid that was found on Vashon Island in Puget Sound.
And just stepping back a minute, I should ask you, what generally does this map reflect? Sightings, you referenced one the same year.
Oh, the green dots are research catches from 2009. The blue squares are sightings from 2009. The red squares are strandings from 2009. The red one is commercial bycatch again in 2009.
And this would have all been from data collected on your 2009 survey?
My survey, and also surveys that were undertaken to look at high sea salmon distribution, sardines, and herring.
The final question before we turn specifically to the diet of the squid, could you identify for us, I've been reminded that I should mark this as the next exhibit.
Exhibit 822.
Mr. Gillespie, could you remind us, or could you identify for us the various hypotheses that have been posited by people for what is causing the squid, the Humboldt squid, to begin its travels north?
There is no clear single hypothesis that's agreed upon at the time. Amongst the candidates are increased abundance of Humboldt squid in their native range, and one hypothesis there is that decreased levels of predation because of decreased numbers of predators on juvenile Humboldt squid might lead to an explosion in population, and therefore their range would need to expand to meet their feeding needs. There are a couple of oceanographic hypotheses. The simplest is just general increased water temperatures and a warming trend. Another is a shallowing of the oxygen minimum layer, a deep water layer that's the boundary between well-oxygenated surface waters and the colder, deeper waters that lack oxygen below. Squid take refuge in this layer, probably as both a physiological cooling mechanism and to avoid predators. And that oxygen minimum layer has been decreasing in depth, that is getting shallower and closer to the surface. And then there's the influence of large-scale oceanographic events like the El Nino Southern Oscillation, which may drive Humboldt squid further north because the surface waters in their southern part of their normal range might be too warm for them, and they're avoiding the hot water and moving up into a thermal range that's more appropriate for them.
Turning to the diet, I'm going to begin by taking you back to September 2009 and proceeding chronologically. The Commission's heard evidence from Dr. Laura Richards about a DFO science workshop that happened on September 30th, 2009. Did you participate in that workshop?
Yes, I did.
And what was the nature of your participation?
My role at that workshop was to bring forward information on Humboldt squid, their distribution, their diet, and the specific question of whether they might prey on salmon.
And I believe we have your presentation. I'll get you to confirm that. It's tab 40. I'm sorry, this is also, for the record, Exhibit 613F. Oh, maybe we should just try Exhibit 613F. Is that possible, Mr. Lynn?
Sure.
Sorry.
I have this marked as Exhibit, tab 40, I'm sorry, I have the wrong one up. That's tab 40, which is 613F.
And I'm not sure if you need to scroll through this, Mr. Gillespie, to identify whether this is the presentation that you made.
This is the presentation I made.
Thank you. You'll agree with me that as of September 2009, at the time you made this presentation, there wasn't any evidence, to your knowledge, that a Humboldt squid had ever actually eaten a salmonid.
That's correct, no direct evidence.
And your PowerPoint here at Exhibit 613F states that.
Yes, I believe it does.
Do you need to double check that?
No, it's the final set of bullets in the summary slide.
So we're in the world of a world where there is no direct evidence. So perhaps I'll ask you, what generally are the limits that determine what a Humboldt squid can or cannot prey upon?
Well, as pointed out by the authors of the report, you need overlap in time and space between the predator and the prey. So they need the opportunity to determine whether something is prey or not. They generally eat animals within a given size range. And then there are possibly considerations around the ability of a particular animal to avoid being preyed upon. Its metabolism and its ability to escape an attempted predation.
So is that its evasive capabilities?
Yes, exactly.
And when you said, there, as noted in the report, there needs to be an overlap in time and space, do you mean the Project 8 report that was provided by Dr. Christensen? And
Yes, sorry, I wasn't clear about that.
Thanks. That's okay. Was there any particular literature that informed, in the absence of direct evidence, this presentation that you made in September 2009? What did you draw upon to be able to present on the biology, diet, habits, etc. of the Humboldt squid?
The primary piece of literature that I used was a Kalkofe paper presented by Dr. John Field, in which he had summarized distribution, biology, and diet of Humboldt squid in the waters off the U.S., particular California and Baja California.
I think we have that. If we could, Mr. Lund, pull up tab 38, please. Mr. Gillespie, is this the article that you just mentioned?
Yes, it is.
For the benefit of everybody here, what is the California Current?
The California Current is a large oceanographic feature. There's a transoceanic current that hits the western coast of North America and splits into two directions, the Alaskan Gyre, which goes north, and the California Current, which goes south.
And in terms of the continental shelf off British Columbia, are British Columbian waters part of the California Current?
Yes, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the year, because where that current strikes North America moves north and south depending on conditions in the ocean.
Thanks. Perhaps we could mark tab 38 as our next exhibit.
Exhibit 823.
I don't know if you're able to just very briefly summarize this particular study and what this report, what the results of this report were.
My particular interest in this report was surrounding the diet of Humboldt squid in eastern Pacific waters and closer to British Columbia. It summarizes that they feed largely on small pelagic species, myctophids, juvenile or small schooling rockfish, hake, and various pelagic invertebrates as well, including other species of squid and pteropods.
And the study, you'll agree, did not identify any salmon in the Humboldt squid's diet in the area studied?
That's correct.
Could we turn to page 141, and perhaps we could highlight out that top graph, number A. Mr. Gillespie, I'm not sure if you've looked at this graph recently, and if you haven't, please feel free to explain that. But my reading of this graph is that jumbo squid and salmon, generally identified as salmon, are at the same trophic level. Am I reading that right?
Yes, I believe you are. Trophic level 4.1. Yeah.
In terms of this particular model that's being used in this particular paper?
Yes.
And what does that mean to a layperson in terms of the likelihood of species at the same trophic level to prey upon each other? Is there anything we should understand from that?
I don't think there's any impediment between species at the same trophic level feeding upon each other. The trophic level is generally determined by what level, whether they're feeding on primary production, secondary grazers, intermediate predators, and then the top level would be an apex predator upon which nothing preys.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we'll leave this aside and just ask you to summarize the results, or sorry, not the results, the activities of your survey in 2009, what you surveyed, your techniques, what was collected, what was measured,
Okay.
where and when.
Yeah. In 2009, we were in talks with people from the U.S., we realized that we were going to very likely have large amounts of Humboldt squid in Canadian waters. So we set out to join a survey that had already been planned. This was a survey of Pacific hake. This is a collaborative survey between the U.S. and Canada, and they had been encountering hake on the U.S. leg, which precedes the Canadian leg. So on short notice, we were able to bring together equipment to fish for squid. We were fully intending to sample any squid we got in the trawls that were used to sample hake. We borrowed an automated jigging machine from a commercial fisher in Vancouver and secured squid two-rod reel arrangements and a number of giant squid jigs to hand line for the squid as well.
DFO had to borrow the jigging equipment?
Yes, we did, yeah. This was a result of a previous collaboration under New and Emerging Fisheries where these fishers had attempted to start a fishery for neon flying squid off British Columbia. And we have a particularly good relationship with this fisher and knew that he had jigging machines in storage that he wasn't using. We just asked if we could borrow one.
And then if you could continue on and tell us what data you collected, what parameters you measured.
Okay. We had conferred with Dr. Field to see what information they were collecting in the south because we wanted the data sets to be consistent. So we took his sampling protocol. We collect morphometric information, which is measures of the size of the various body parts. We collected some tissues for genetic analysis. We collected the stomachs. We collected the heads because the heads contain structures called statoliths, which are similar to the otoliths in a fish and can be used to determine the age of the animal. I believe that pretty much covers it. We sampled anything that came up in the trawl. We also did our jigging at night when the trawl machinery was shut down, when we weren't fishing, and secured the same samples from those squid.
On the morphometric data, what were the range of squid lengths? Are you able to explain the general range of lengths of squid and maybe perhaps the average length of squid?
I don't know that I could actually cite the average. The range of squid in terms of total length, I believe, was from around 79 or 80 centimeters to about 137 centimeters. So total length would be measured from the tip of the mantle to the tip of the arms.
And compared to squid that are fully grown, are these as big as Humboldt squid get? Or are they?
No, Humboldt squid should get to around 200 centimeters in total length and up to 50 kilograms. So
you attended a presentation. After that, what happened? Were you consulted on in relation to giving any advice? Was that the end of your involvement with DFO science managers on that issue?
I would say yes. I came to provide information to the meeting and did so, and after that I was not required.
Were you asked to provide any input on a briefing note?
No, not directly.
Were you asked to provide any input on speaking notes for members of Parliament?
No.
We're going to ask you about the briefing note to the Minister, which, Mr. Lunn, is both tab 39 of our materials and also exhibit 616A. Mr. Gillespie, have you seen this before?
Yes, I have.
Could I ask you to look at the third bullet of the summary box? Does that bullet, and I'll read it, it reads, sea lice from fish farms, Humboldt squid predation, and U.S. fisheries could have contributed to the sockeye mortality, but are likely insufficient in themselves to explain the poor return. Does that assessment reflect the discussions at the September 30th, 2009 workshop?
For the period that I was there, yes, it does.
Were you not there for the entire meeting?
No, I was not.
Were you there for the majority of the meeting, or simply?
I was there for the first day of a two-day meeting.
And if you could turn to page 2 of this document, this memo. Under the heading Analysis, DFO comment, there's a bullet number 3, which reads, predation on juvenile salmon in the Strait of Georgia. In Strait of Georgia, there are no known shifts in predator abundance that could explain increased predation in 2007. My only question here is were Humboldt squid implicated in any way by this particular bullet?
No, Humboldt squid do not regularly occur in the Strait of Georgia.
Thanks. And finally, the third bullet on page 2, that isn't a number but a bullet, reads, the following factors may have contributed to sockeye mortality but not at a magnitude sufficient to explain the poor return in 2009. Number 1 under that bullet relates to the squid and says, Humboldt squid is a voracious predator that has increased dramatically in abundance in Canadian waters since 2007. Salmon have not been identified in their diets. Surveys in 2009 will be analyzed to assess any possible link to salmon. Since 2007, does that mean that increases happened from 2008 onwards? Is that your understanding of when abundance increases happened?
I believe the key word there is dramatically. So there was evidence of increasing abundance from 2004 to 2007, but the change from 2007 to 2009 could be characterized as dramatic.
Thank you. And do you think that this is reasonable advice? Do you think that absent any direct evidence, it's reasonable to advise the minister that predation by Humboldt squid may have contributed to sockeye mortality?
I believe so, in that we still had work to be done. We had samples that were yet to be analyzed, so we could not say definitively they were not implicated.
How does that differ from the majority of species we've heard about over the last few days? Salmon shark and lack of information on salmon shark abundance, arrowtooth flounder and the lack of information about its biology. Couldn't any number of species have equally had that advice? Why was the Humboldt squid singled out? That's a lot of questions, but...
Yeah, no, I agree with the point that you're making. That's true. As to why the Humboldt squid was singled out, I didn't author the briefing note, so I couldn't say for certain. My impression would be that Humboldt squid were being discussed quite openly in the media at the time, so they were, for lack of a better term, a hot topic, and someone perhaps anticipated that the minister might ask.
So this briefing note, this advice to the minister may have been driven, your view is it may have been driven as much by what was high profile as what the scientists may have been discussing?
Perhaps in the case of Humboldt squid, yes.
Thanks. Knowing what you know now, looking back to this briefing note, do you think that this was a bit of a false alarm?
I wouldn't say so, because I don't think we know so much more now that we can still exclude them.
And we're going to get to that now. After September 2009, I take it you learned of some direct evidence. Could you tell us what you learned and when you learned it?
In February of 2010, there were 2 additional pieces of information. The first was that I was delivered a copy of a presentation made at the Pacific Salmon Commission that showed photographs of a Chinook jack from the mouth of the Columbia River that had wounds that were typical of a squid bite or a squid attack. The second piece of evidence was an email from Dr. John Field saying that they had the second piece of information was from Dr. John Field, who said that they had found a salmon otolith in a squid stomach in the mouth of Juan de Fuca Street.
Could we please turn to Exhibit 573, which is tab 41? Very briefly, Mr. Gillespie, I'm going to seek your views on the presentation that DFO scientists made to the Pacific Salmon Commission workshop in June of 2010. And I probably, if we could go to page 42, I believe. Are you familiar with this presentation?
Yes, I am.
Did you contribute to it?
Yes, I did.
Could we turn to page 48? 487. Under the heading 6.0 predation, not the first paragraph, but the second paragraph that begins with Humboldt squid appeared in BC and Southeast Alaska in 2004. I take it that you disagree with that statement?
We have categorical evidence that it was Humboldt squid that appeared in 2004. We have anecdotal evidence that they were present before that.
Moving further along in this paragraph, it reads, to date, only a few Humboldt squid have been recovered in the Strait of Georgia. Thus, it is unlikely that they are responsible for eating a large number of sockeye smolts, and that even if they do consume sockeye, that they would have a greater impact on Barkley Sound and Columbia River sockeye stocks than to be able to focus on Fraser River sockeye. Leaving aside the somewhat confusing grammar of that sentence, do you agree with that reasoning?
Yes, I do. The squid that were found in the strait were found in December, which would decrease the probability of any overlap with out-migrating smolts. There were only a couple of individuals found in the strait over that time period, and at least up to 2007, Humboldt squid had not been seen north of the west coast of Vancouver Island. Therefore, they would have had more interaction with west coast Vancouver Island stocks than those leaving through Johnson Strait.
I'd like to read just one sentence fragment there, apart from the information related to Georgia Strait, and that's, again, thus it is unlikely that they are responsible for eating a large number of sockeye smolts. With that, insofar as that statement is read by itself, would you agree with that?
If you mean, is the argument restrained to Fraser River sockeye or sockeye in general, I think they had the opportunity to eat sockeye smolts on the west coast of Vancouver Island up to that point, certainly. The term a large amount is relative.
I take it that it's your view that it was, well, let me ask in a fairer way. Is it your view that it's possible that...
Yes, it is possible that Humboldt squid ate sockeye smolts.
Is it possible that Humboldt squid are responsible for eating a large number of Fraser River sockeye smolts in 2007?
No, I don't think so.
So as of June 2010, when we have this presentation, and you and presumably the author, the lead author, Mr. Trudell, thought that it was unlikely that Fraser River sockeye smolts were being eaten up in large numbers by Humboldt squid. Are you aware of any further advice to the minister on that issue?
No, I'm not.
Between September 2009, when you made your presentation, and June 2010, were you consulted by DFO or PSC fishery managers who were planning for the 2010 sockeye fishery?
I had some interactions with the PSC in terms of talking about opportunities to potentially sample Humboldt squid in their test fisheries should they turn up again. But in terms of developing management plans for sockeye, no, I wasn't.
As it turns out, there were relatively very high returns of sockeye, Fraser River sockeye, in 2010. I'm wondering if there's any reasonable inference about the role of Humboldt squid given the high returns in 2010. Should one draw anything from that?
I don't draw too much from it. Let's just say that the coming year will be a better indicator. I would hate to infer anything on 2 years' data.
Fair enough. And now if you could describe for us the results of the 2009 survey that you and your colleagues did.
We collected around 200 stomachs from squid, and all of these were sent to Dr. Field in California because he had offered, in collaboration with processing of his samples from south of the border, to process ours as well so that they were all processed in a consistent manner. Of the 200 we sent, we did not process any of the samples that had been taken from trawl-caught squid because we were concerned about bias in the diet information due to a process called net predation. So when a predator is confined in a net with a number of species, you can bias any information about their diet because they will attack other animals in the net, and you end up with tissue in their stomachs that may either be species that they would not normally prey upon in a natural setting, or it may skew the ratios of the various species that were present in the stomachs. So we decided not to process the trawl-caught stomachs. We processed about 160 jig-caught stomachs, and of those, 2 presented positive evidence of predation on salmon. The first was one that had otoliths in it that were attributed to salmonids, so either salmon or osmerids smelt. And the second and subsequent genetic analysis of the bones in that stomach showed that I believe they were chum and pink salmon remains.
And maybe we, for your assistance, if we pull up tab 44 now, it has an email in relation to this. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think this might assist.
Thank you.
Do you recognize this email?
Yes, I do.
And could we turn to page 2 of this email? And perhaps enlarge as much as we can before the date break. Perhaps with reference to this email, you can continue describing in general the results of the survey with respect to salmon identifies.
Yeah, we had 2 samples that contained salmon remains. One was initially thought to be coho salmon based on the otolith morphology, but the otoliths were too eroded to be conclusive. Tissue samples from that indicated that they were 4 of the 16 bones tested were chum salmon, and 1 of the 16 bones tested was a pink salmon. And the rest of that sample was Pacific herring. The second sample had no identifiable otoliths, but the bones were tested from it, and all 8 of the bones tested were pink salmon. So that basically summarizes the results in terms of salmon predation. The definitive statement at the end is there were no sockeye in any of these.
I'm just wondering about the American. About the American samples as well. Were there any salmon found in the U.S. samples that form part of Dr. Field's assessment or analysis?
Yes, there were 20 squid collected at Secu, Washington, which is just inside the mouth of Juan de Fuca Strait. Of those 20 squid, 3 of them contained salmon remains, and the total remains from those 3 squid were 3 Chinook and 2 coho encountered in those stomachs.
And what was that as a relative proportion of the types and volume of prey found in American squid generally?
Very small proportion.
Could we mark this as the next exhibit, please?
Exhibit 824.
I realize that I've only asked you about the PSC presentation in relation to juveniles, in relation to smolts. There's a line in this email that we might have a discussion about adults. Thanks. So halfway through the second paragraph, the size range of all the salmon encountered based on otolith length, fish length relationships was about 10 to 15 centimeters. Does that suggest to you anything about the capacity of Humboldt squid to prey on adult sockeye or adult salmon?
This information indicates that the salmon that were taken were juveniles, and there is other information in the literature that talks about the range of size that Humboldt squid prey usually fall within.
I believe you may be referring to page 32 of the Project 8 report, which is Exhibit 783. In that first paragraph, the authors of Project 8 state in the last sentence that the prey sizes throughout the life cycle ranges between 5% and 15% of the squid total length.
Yes.
You've told us that the squid sampled in 2009 ranged from, on the small end, from 79 centimeters to, on the large end, to about 137 centimeters.
Yes.
5 to 15%. Can you help me with the math?
Okay, if you use the lower end of the size range and a 5% ratio, you're talking about 4 centimeters, a prey item that would be 4 centimeters in length. And if you use the upper end of the size range and the 15% ratio, you're looking at something that would be 21 centimeters. So certainly the results of the stomach sampling, where we have indication of size, fall within that range.
And what about Fraser River returning adults? Do they fall within that range?
I would defer more to others who have a stronger knowledge of the size of returning adults, but I had discussions with Timber Whitehouse of DFO about what the size range of returns might be. He indicated to me that returning jacks are in the 30 to 45 centimeter range, and returning adults are 55 to 75 centimeters in length, which would rule, using this model, would rule them out as potential prey for Humboldt squid.
Thank you. Do you have any other views on this page and the next page of the Project 8 report about the Humboldt squid? Maybe we could expand it out to be the whole page. Did anything strike you as incorrect?
Not glaringly incorrect. There's one line that says that Humboldt squid do not appear to respawn in the northern part of their range. It's fairly clear from the literature and also from the maturity stages of the squid that we sampled that they do not spawn in the northern part of their range, but it in no way affects the conclusions of this section.
And the last paragraph, or the first paragraph on the next page.
Mm-hmm.
The last sentence of this paragraph reads, if, however, the smolts have had to pass through an accumulation of jumbo squid, it is entirely possible that they could have a strong predation impact on the sockeye. Now, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, from your reaction to the PSC report authored by yourself and Dr. Trudell, is that your view is that, in fact, it's unlikely that the Humboldt squid are having had a strong predation effect on Fraser River sockeye smolts in 2007.
Yeah, I think that conclusion is drawn mainly from the lack of information we have on overlap in time and space. Certainly, given the behavior of the squid, the size of the smolts, if there were encounters, there would be predation. But the likelihood, I don't speak in terms of likelihood, Dr. Trudell does. I say it's certainly possible that if they were encountered, there would be predation. And I believe, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I believe the unlikely conclusion was drawn from our lack of information on overlap in time and space.
It seems to me that a lack of data, on one hand, has led Dr. Christensen and Dr. Treitz to conclude that it's entirely possible that there could be a strong predation effect. But the same lack of data, on the other hand, has led Dr. Trudell to conclude that it's unlikely that there could be that there was in 2007 a strong predation effect. Mm-hmm. What should we make of this?
If we're speaking about 2007 in particular, we have no evidence that Humboldt squid were in migratory pathways of sockeye smolts. We found them off the west coast of Vancouver Island and did not find them further north in British Columbia, which would lead me to support, for that year at least in 2007, that it was unlikely that they had an impact on out-migrating Fraser River sockeye smolts.
Thank you. My final short line of questions, I think I'll only be 3 or 4 more minutes, is on research opportunity and funding issues. What's the source of your funding for research and monitoring activities?
For cephalopods?
For cephalopods.
For cephalopods is just the regular A-base allocation that comes into my program that focuses on mollusks in general, so bivalves and cephalopods. Is there
any funding that you have in your budget that's specifically devoted towards cephalopods?
No, I get a small budget for the program, and the use of that budget is discretionary.
And perhaps we could pull up at this point tab 43. Are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I am.
Did you prepare it?
Yes, I did.
And could you describe it for us?
This describes the research and, oops.
Sorry?
It's okay. This describes research and monitoring projects that were under my supervision and the budgets associated with them. So my regular A-base budget for intertidal bivalves, which would include cephalopods, that's the mollusk budget, was pretty static at about $11,000 a year over that period. I started to receive some invasive species funding in 2006-2007, which started at about $40,000 and was decreased in 2009 and 10 to $33,600. And then in 2009 and 10, I got directed funding to support surveys for the SARA-listed Olympia oyster that amounted to about $45.8 thousand.
The note at the bottom of this funding summary notes that no funding directly allocated to Humboldt squid, spent $1,000 discretionary in 2009-10 for survey gear and expenses. Is that a sufficient amount of money to do meaningful research into Humboldt squid predation?
I would hazard it probably is not. We did the best we could in terms of providing gear and using the ship of opportunity to provide sampling opportunities. There's always more or less expensive ways to conduct research, and to go out and do a targeted Humboldt squid survey would be very expensive and very difficult to organize because we don't know which years they're going to be in Canadian waters, and our cycle for scheduling vessels and everything else is a year in advance.
Right.
So this was largely responsive to the opportunity to sample them in a year when they were going to be in BC in large numbers.
In the vein of recommendations, is there an alternative between doing your own targeted, as you've said, very expensive survey that is only a Humboldt squid survey, and on the other hand, opportunistically tagging along with the Hake survey? Is there some middle ground whereby you have the ability to design your research questions and structure your research without spending money that you don't have?
I think the middle ground, the tagging along on the Hake survey and having people collect samples for us in other surveys is the cheapest alternative, and going out and directing a survey at Humboldt squid would be very expensive. Alternatives are to continue looking for other ships of opportunity that might afford sampling opportunities. If one wanted to focus in on the question of whether or not Humboldt squid ate sockeye smolts, you need overlap in time and space between Humboldt squid, sockeye smolts, and someone sampling Humboldt squid. So if we were to focus exclusively on this question, we would be looking for opportunities where that overlap would occur.
Are you currently looking into that opportunity at all?
Given that they didn't show up last year and aren't predicted to this year, not actively, no.
Okay. I'll let Canada get its turn now, but thank you for your time. I'm sorry, I should actually mark Exhibit 822 as Exhibit 822, this funding summary. I'm sorry. Huh?
825,
Thank you.
tab 43, is that?
Thank you, yes.
Geneva Grandy McNeil for Canada with Tim Timberg. I might be able to significantly cut back my questionings if we take the break now, Mr. Commissioner.
Let's do that. Here with no recess for 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Or 10 minutes?